We are in conversation with a very important bureaucrat and senior government official of the Finance Ministry, the Economic Affairs Secretary, Mr. Ajay Seth. The Finance Ministry's team is just back from Gandhinagar, the third leg of G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting. A lot of deliberations have happened there, and Mr. Seth has agreed to give some time to CNBC TV18 to share his thoughts on the same. So thank you so much. Always a pleasure speaking to you. So thank you very much for this. So just want to start off first with, the macro deliberations. Economic growth rate and inflation. These are two major themes that have been, on the cards since the Ukraine invasion especially happened and post-pandemic. So what was the discussion like, the deliberations like, what were the concerns that were flagged, and more important, sir, where does India stand in context of that?
Okay. See, it is quite obvious that the global economy was discussed, and one full session was there on discussion on the global economy. And considering that the energy and commodity prices are off their peak, but nevertheless inflation in major economies, especially in advanced countries, continues to be fairly elevated. So as a result, the monetary policy rates and monetary policy stance remains to be restrictive. Inflation policy rates are high, are likely to remain higher, and that creates spillover to other sectors as well. So what kind of a policy coordination is needed among major economies on the monetary policy side? At the same time, how to take care of the spillovers. And in some countries wherein there may be impact on general population, then what kind of a targeted and transient support can be provided. So these were the aspects which were discussed in the context of the global economy. Then you ask, where does India stand? This was also taken note of. The growth rate in India continues to be robust, continues to be highest among in the major economies, and inflation is within the policy band, but there is likely to be, that is more specific to us, considering that at the global level growth rate, overall growth rate, as well as the global trade volumes are going to be subdued. So that will have some impact on the margin on us as well.
Okay, so that would be more on the growth side. Inflation side, sir?
See, the inflation side, if you take it, that what is India's inflation rate? Inflation rate as compared with, if you take the monthly numbers which have come last week, they are more than the previous month, and those impacts are, these are much subdued level. These can be some of the seasonal impacts which are there, and this is something which a close watch is being kept.
Right. So also the the community could not be adopted, so to say, because of various concerns. So what was it that came about in terms of things raised by Russia and China, particularly? That was the reason why the community could not be kind of finalized.
See, just to share with you that outcome statement and chair summary except on 3 paragraphs, remaining 23 there was absolute consensus. It took us fairly long time, spread over 7 days and 75 hours to arrive at a common document. But why it is not communique but an outcome document is the 2 paragraphs relating with the geopolitical situation. And there one country, China, took a position that geopolitical issues are not in the domain of the finance ministers, central bank governors forum. Those 2 paragraphs also take a position, and that those could not take a position, but that was what the leaders in Bali, G20 leaders in Bali had said. So it adopts the same language. Russia, of course, is one of the parties, or is one of the in the war position. So Russia dissuaded itself because of the reference to Russian-Ukraine war. So these 2 countries on the geopolitical side. Then there was another study which was done under Indian presidency, was a G20 study on the macroeconomic impact of energy and food insecurity.
Yes, they're very important. I was going to ask you on that.
So that study is that macroeconomic impact, but Russia, because there's a reference to Russia-Ukraine war, that study was not about the causes of the high of energy and food insecurity. That was about the consequences, what it means for monetary policy or for the matter for fiscal policy. But Russia took a position that they cannot associate with that report as with the G20 report. So except for these aspects, on every other thing there was a consensus.
Okay.
So these are the things which was felt that that forum can't be deciding or taking a view on geopolitical issues.
I'll come to the consensus part just a bit, sir. You mentioned about the energy and food crises caused by, conflict and stuff like that. So consequences. So I mean, basically 3 or 4 highlights that you could share with us.
See, for example,
and where do we stand? Where does India stand in that context?
See, first of all, we are a large energy importing country in case of the petroleum products, and as we are all aware, the prices are off their peak, so they remain continues to be elevated, but position is much better than 2022. Again, a slower global growth rate is also which puts a downward pressure on the prices. At the same time, there have been a few instances where the producers want to cut the overall production. So that is a separate play which happens. So again, the discussion that paper gets into that, when the prices are pretty high, or the food prices, and if we say in the 2022, both energy and food prices were very high.
Absolutely.
And that has an impact on large section of population in various countries, wherein who can't afford those higher prices. Now, how to deal with those consequences? So that was a discussion. It is an interesting one, and in due course of time that will also be made in a public domain, so all the people will have a chance to look at it.
Right. So in terms of the positive outcomes, multilateral development banks, what needs to be done, the road forward, capital infusion to be, will be required. So what does this all mean? And again, then where do we stand in that? How important is this reform going forward for India? Most of the recommendations made by the NK panel and Larry Summers, they have been accepted. So, how are you going to proceed on that? How important is it for India? And how will this capital be raised? Your thoughts?
See, there were several aspects were discussed, and one major, I'll say that outcome of this, that whatever priorities Indian presidency in the finance or has set it out for the finance track, for all 5 of them, there was a good traction, there was a good approval, a positivity was coming in, and strengthening of MDBs was one such area. And then there's an ongoing work that how the existing balance sheets of multilateral development banks can be optimized. That means using the existing capital in a more efficient manner. There is a capital adequacy framework panel. It was set up by Indian presidency. Report was finalized last year, and the roadmap for implementation has been prepared and endorsed in this meeting. It was done over the past 6 months, but it was endorsed in this meeting. And the conclusion there is that that will release approximately $200 billion over 10 years.
Okay.
That is again all MDBs put together, so that will be something they can then lend to other countries, the borrower countries. The second piece comes in wherein the independent expert group, which was put together by India, wherein Mr. N.K. Singh and Professor Lawrence Summers are the 2 co-conveners, and there are 7 very eminent people are the members of that. They have given their volume 1 report, Triple Agenda. That was discussed. I had made a presentation to the deputies, the finance deputies, in the beginning of the meeting itself. There were several suggestions have been received, and we will be communicating it to the independent expert group. So that was a very positive manner. There's a positive narration came in. The G20 appreciated the efforts of the independent expert group. They took note of the recommendations and said that they will examine it along with the volume 2. At the same time, they asked the MDBs to consider those recommendations to improve their effectiveness, of course within their own governance framework. So that is a good piece of movement which have been received. On the agenda which Indian presidency had said, that MDBs should be cubed, they should reform themselves, or reform meaning that their operational capacity, operational models has to change so as to be an active participants in addressing or helping countries to address 21st century challenges.
Okay. $200 billion was next 10 odd years. So any discussions on how this capital will be raised and what's going to be the role of countries like, especially like India? Like how important is it for us?
See, this is important. First of all, the requirement which the report brings out is trillions of dollars are needed. It's a $3 trillion additional money. And if you read the report, the triple agenda report, out of that $2 trillion is supposed to be through the domestic resources itself. And like India, is spent something around, I'll put it 30 to 35% of its GDP as a gross capital formation. Each country puts in to the extent they have got the capacity, and then comes the question is from where the additional capital is going to come in. So estimate by the expert group is that about $1 trillion of external financing is needed, of which $500 billion will come from private finances, 500 from external official channel, of which MDBs have to bring in about $260 billion every year, and they have made a set of recommendations, and that discussion is ongoing. These are not the issues which get decided in one meeting or 1 year. India's aim was to let a discourse of right proportion with all facets of the challenges as well as how to reach that ambition level, raise the ambition, and also suggest that what should be the way forward to meet that ambition. That is what our attempt has been, and that found a good support.